Thanks, Ben. Hi, folks. So, I'm Laura Wade, and this is my good friend, Pauline Robson. And we have the privilege of working in sustainability within the media and marketing industry. And one of the biggest challenges we face in the industry today is business as usual. And so, next slide, please.
I had the clicker. Yeah. Brilliant. Good stuff.
And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to use our imagination to envisage what a better world and a better planet could look like. So bear with us. There is going to be a bit of creativity in this.
Well, there we go. So, we would like to invite you to join us on a journey into 2030. You might want to close your eyes for this, not least because that will probably start to make you feel sick if you look at it for too long. So close your eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, try to shut out all of the craziness that's happening in the bar over there. It's tequila time over there. And imagine that we are travelling forward into the future to the year 2030. There we go. They're doing it in the back row, amazing. And 2030, as you probably know, is the year by which we need to have halved our carbon emissions to have any chance of securing a livable world for our future. So there's quite a lot at stake in 2030. And the 2030 that we are travelling to, as we close our eyes and think about where we're going, is a year in which we have done everything we possibly could to make that happen. We didn't fix it all because we left it far too late to get started, but we all pulled together and we made a concerted effort to reduce our carbon emissions. So we're going into a very different world from the one that we can envisage today. So imagine that you're travelling to that version of 2030 and take a moment to think about what that would be like. When you arrive in that version of 2030, what can you see there? Hoverboards. What can you hear there apart from tequila hour? What does it smell like? Who's around you and what are they doing? What does it feel like to be in this version of 2030? Take a moment to kind of envisage it and experience it and soak it all in.
Okay, so it's 2030, we're opening our eyes, and we're in a city. And that is not a surprise because by 2030, 60% of the world's global population will live in cities, and that will increase to 70%. But this is a city, it's probably London, but we don't recognise it based on today's standards because cities have been retrofitted to be designed for well-being and community spaces. There isn't a hum of traffic. There's no traffic, really, apart from bikes, bicycles, like cycles, and electric buses. Public transport is free, by the way, because the renewable energy transition has happened, making energy very much affordable, enable us to have free public transport available to everyone. The hum that we can hear is actually from nature and the bird song and the birds of prey that are circling, and that's because the UK's biodiversity strategy has been fully implemented by 2030. And something else is very different. The pace is very slower because actually there's no rush hour because AI has transformed how we work. We no longer are beholden to this 46-hour week. Instead, people are now pursuing creative pursuits and being part of communities and community member groups. The high street has been totally transformed. It's no longer about fast fashion or fast food. It's now a place where you go to rent, repair, refurbish, and meet and get educated on what it means to be part of your community. Life is good. People are content. People are generous, kind, and tolerant with each other.
So how did we get there? I know there's some crazy looks in the audience. People are a little bit confused. How did we get to that version of 2030 rather than one that we're on track for currently? Well, the main thing that happened is that we changed our minds. We changed our mindset. Now, in 2024, there were about half the world's population went to the polls. And what we saw with many of the elections around the world is that it caused a lot of division, hatred, and fear. And we started to see a backlash against that. People started to reconsider what was happening in the world. So we changed our mindsets from one of competition and scarcity to one of optimism, abundance, and collaboration. We began to realise that our economies depended on a healthy ecosystem, a world that could exist safely within its planetary boundaries, as well as a really solid social foundation where everybody could have equitable access to resources and to well-being. And we began to reconsider the way that we thought about the world. We started to look to indigenous wisdom and indigenous ways of knowing, and we reappraised the way that we think about our relationship to the natural world, seeing ourselves as being part of the natural world rather than something that's separate from it.
So the decade leading up to 2030 saw us witness the fastest economic transition that we'd ever seen before. And this meant that brands and the advertising industry totally had to radically change. And one of the biggest changes that happened is that we stopped seeing people as consumers. We stopped defining them by their consumption behaviours, and we started to understand that we are all citizens, even brands. And by behaving like brands, treating audiences like citizens, what agencies and marketeers were able to do was start to look at what needs they could fulfil for those citizens. There was an example back in 2015 by the IKEA brand called Live Lagoon, where they worked with about 1,500 families, and they worked with them in social media groups, in-store and online, and they helped them live more sustainably. The result of that over a 3-year period were the families that took part felt happier, felt more control in their lives, and were able to save about £1,000 a year in shopping bills. That was all delivered by a brand that was helping people be good citizens and have happier and healthier lives. So the move towards citizenship began.
One of the biggest shifts that we saw from a business perspective is the way that we thought about value and the way that we thought about our stakeholders. So we moved away from this idea of driving short-term profit at any expense without considering its impact on our society and on the planet, towards thinking about long-term prosperity and well-being. And we began to think about how we could create shared value rather than solely focusing on shareholder value. So we began to see examples like Mars, who realised that their business fundamentally depends on the health of ecosystems. So the example here is of Hope Reef. Mars realised that they needed healthy coral reefs because their fish supply for Sheba premium cat food depended on healthy ocean life. 0.1% of ocean surface area is coral reef, but 25% of all marine life depends on healthy coral reef systems. So in order for them to have a sustainable supply of fish, they need healthy coral reefs. So Mars invested in coral reef restoration research, in projects. They turned their first project in Indonesia into Hope Reef, which was the world's first living coral billboard, viewable on Google Earth. All of the monetization of the content around this was then reinvested back into more coral reef restoration projects. So it became a really regenerative way of doing marketing, also future guarding the safety of their business. And we saw forward-thinking companies like Faith in Nature start to reconsider their stakeholders. So Faith in Nature is the first company to give nature a seat on their board. So that means that nature, a representative of the natural world, is present in all of their board meetings, is given a voice and a vote, and bringing the interests of nature into all of their business decisions. And they've open sourced the way they did that, so other companies can follow suit and give nature a stake and a say in the way they run their business, so that it's run for the benefit of the planet and not just for the benefit of themselves.
Now, legislation was a key driver of change, and in the early part of the decade, we had the UK's right to repair legislation, and we had the EU circular economy law coming into function, and the UK launched the first UN-backed circular economy excellence centre here in the UK in 2024. And what that meant was the products were being designed for durability. The UK right to repair legislation meant that electronics and appliances now had to have an extended life of over 10 years, which was essential because the UK was the second highest polluter when it came to e-waste per capita, averaging around 23.9 kilograms per person per year. So products began to become more durable. They also were modular, so you could take them apart and fix them yourselves, so you didn't have to constantly replace, for example, your iPhone. What this meant for marketing and advertising, though, was that short-term sales began to fade in terms of their priority. And actually, products needed to become services, again, serving the needs of citizens in terms of education on how to fix and repair products, how to rent products rather than buy them. And people had less stuff, but more joy in their life. So as an industry, we had to help redefine what growth looked like for brands and marketeers.
Now, as technology developed, supply chains became more transparent, and they started to become a driver of corporate and brand reputation. Data from Kantar suggests that 49% of a company's reputation is driven by responsibility. So we started to see that tracked and meaningful progress towards ethical supply chains could be a real driver of reputation for brands. A trailblazer in this space was Tony's Chocolonely. Now, they have built their brand around their mission, which is to raise awareness of and eliminate slavery and child labour from the cocoa supply chain. 1.5 million children work in the cocoa trade in Ghana and Ivory Coast alone. So that's an enormous number. So Tony's have made it their business to, as I say, build their brand around it, even down to the way they design their chocolate bars, which are designed to represent the inequity and the inequality within the cocoa trade. But they realised that they couldn't do this just by working alone. So they have invited their competitors to join them on this journey through their Open Chain initiative. So they're bringing in their competitors to work with them in a pre-competitive way. So collaborating to drive structural change and positive impact to change the industry for the better.
By 2030, greenwashing was illegal, and you could face jail sentences based on it. And this started to build momentum again at the beginning of the decade. Greenwashing was working. Brands were selling products off the back of greenwashing, but also greenwashing was helping to delay progress and cause confusion. So therefore, the CMA introduced the Green Claims Code, which meant that a company would be liable for 10% of their global turnover if they were found to breach greenwashing guidelines. And as an individual, you could be fined up to $300,000. So as an influencer, if you were caught greenwashing, there was a significant financial penalty. So as agencies and as marketers, we recognised that using advertising platforms to sell sustainability was not the right strategy. Actually, what we needed to focus on instead is to help people live more sustainably and to drive sustainable behaviour change.
And finally, in 2024, you could not move for presentation panels about AI. It was everywhere.
Or retail media, apparently.
Well, and that. But we began to ask ourselves a question. So what if we took AI and applied it not to extracting even more resources from a planet that's already exceeded 6 out of 9 of its safe planetary boundaries, but we started to apply it to solving problems that were going to create long-term prosperity and well-being for people and planet. So we started to think about how it could help fight deforestation or regenerate biodiversity. We started to look at how it could inform agriculture to increase crop yields whilst minimising its impacts on the environment. And we started to look at how it could help us optimise our energy grids, managing supply and demand of renewable energy so we could more quickly decarbonise our energy systems. And we started to turn AI to helping us to solve these challenges, deploying technology for the sake of long-term well-being for all.
Unfortunately, though, AI was used to drive business as usual, particularly within the advertising industry. And today we are following the pathway of business as usual, which means we are sleepwalking into the fact by 2030 we will have lost the Arctic, we will have pretty much lost most coral reef, about 95 to 97% of that, all through our excessive use of consumption and materials that the planet cannot regenerate fast enough for us. We are walking into a situation by 2030 where 250,000 additional deaths will happen annually, mainly in the global south. So if you believe in equality, we need to address that as a global community. And we are going to see 7 times more extreme weather events. So business as usual is what we're on track for, and we need to address that. We only have 2,009 days left until 2030, and we need radical change.
So how do we get there? How do we reimagine a future so that it's more like the one that we envisaged at the beginning of this session, rather than the one that Laura's just outlined for us there? Well, all of the examples that we've talked you through are not from 2030. They're all from businesses doing this work today. They're all from companies who have stepped outside of business as usual, who've rethought their approaches and reimagined a better future today. So there are a number of ways we can start to do this. Firstly, we need to reimagine our business models. So the current paradigm that we have of take, make, waste is no longer fit for purpose. It's not sustainable. We are currently using up 1.5 planets worth of resources every year. That's a global average. In the States, they use 5. That means they're using resources 5 times quicker than the planet can replenish them. So we need to move to a circular economy. We need to rethink our business model so we're relying more on resale, rental, recycling, repurposing, products as services. And we need to rethink our metrics of success and redefine what success really means. So this is about taking a longer-term view rather than focusing on short-term profits, but thinking about the long-term impact on people and on planet, because we rely on all of those things to be successful. Secondly, we need to rethink our view of stakeholders. We need to take a much more holistic view of who we are in service of. So yes, of course, that's our customers, that's our employees, that's our shareholders, but it's also the communities that we operate in. It's also the ecosystems that our businesses rely on because we can't function without them, and it's future generations. We need to think about what kind of value we're creating for these stakeholders as well as the ones that are closest to our business. And we need to think about who loses if we win. How do we take a bigger view of who we need to be in service of? And finally, and this is the final point, but actually this is the starting point, this all starts with us, because actually climate change is personal. It's starting to impact us all, and it will continue to do so until we start to tackle it. It's going to impact our children, our nieces and our nephews. Gandhi said the future depends on what you do today. So actually, the change that we need to see, it begins right now. So as you emerge from this session back into the tequila bar over there and back into the busy world of MadFest, ask yourselves a question. What are you going to do today to bring into being that version of 2030 that we saw at the beginning of the session?
That's us.
It. Thank you very much.